Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. Thank you so much for being here, Josh. I appreciate your taking the time. I know it's an odd time of the morning for you, and because we're a little.
Well, we're in the future in Australia, so we're used to.
Yes.
We're travelers. And everyone's from somewhere. We're a big island, so we're used to the rest of the world being on the other time zones.
Yeah. So where in Australia are you?
So I'm in Sydney. I'm from Melbourne originally. And very close to the Opera House, to give you a landmark, and the bridge.
Iconic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
So I usually start out these conversations by asking you about if you have an early memory of how sound moved you. Do you have one of those that you could talk about?
Yeah, so we lived in Toronto when we were kids, and we had a car that was in the early 80s that used to say, "The door is ajar," and it was a cool car. It wasn't a very cool car, but it had a great sound. That's probably the first sound that I can think of when I was about 4 or 5.
Okay.
And that really moved me, but I was always interested in sound. And I learned how to play piano from the age of 5, and
Wow.
was very musical early. Yeah.
Did you have a musical family? Did they encourage that, or?
Not really. I don't know. They're not really they kind of encouraged it. No, like I probably had the same experience that many pretty average piano players have at their house, which is, "Shut up! Would you stop playing? I'm trying to blow." So I had a lot of that, but I didn't have a musical teacher that I ever connected with. But my cousin Dione, who's about 6 years older than me, she was very musical, great piano player, and I used to spend a lot of time with her, and she would inspire me to play piano.
Wonderful. Yeah. It's always nice to have some people in your family who at least get it musically.
Well, yeah. And my the first CD I owned was Billy Joel Live in Russia, the concert album.
Okay.
And Angry Young Man is played unbelievably in that concert. And so many of the other songs as well. And so that became my first album. And I think the first album that you own is a very important album.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It sets you up for it sets you up for your music, I think. So my music was piano, rock and roll, inspired by Billy Joel, and also the craftsmanship of Billy Joel and his band made me, I guess, just kind of obsessed with it.
Sure.
Yeah,
I grew up with that as well. My parents were playing Billy Joel and Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and and Stevie Wonder. Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
talk about piano.
I had Hot August Night on repeat, and Peter, Paul and Mary, and Peter, Paul and Mary. Like, I don't know what was going on in my dad's mind, but and Mum loved show tunes, so she had Phantom of the Opera blaring at all times.
Oh. Okay.
So it was, and also being Jewish and having a lot of Jewish music, especially as a child, there's lots of songs. A lot of that stuff really sticks in your brain.
Well, yeah, Fiddler on the Roof, if your mom was listening to show tunes, Yep,
Fiddler on the Roof was very important in our house. My brother my brother was in the wedding scene of that when he was like 6 years old.
Really?
So at a school play.
So cool.
So it really shapes you.
Yeah, it totally does. I remember listening to Barbra Streisand growing up a lot.
Yeah.
That was me learning how to sing. That was
Yeah.
yeah. So I definitely agree. It's iconic. It's something that you remember, and wow, yeah.
Yeah.
So
But then
yeah,
also I was going to say comedy on tapes as well.
okay.
I loved comedy
What
on
kind of
tapes.
comedy?
Just old Jews telling jokes. Jackie Mason, Billy
Okay.
Crystal, Woody
Yeah.
Allen, Lenny Bruce, Mel Brooks. There's an album that was done in the Catskills called "You Don't Have to Be Jewish,"
Hmm.
um, and then I got the Jewish joke book, and all of these things kind of melded together and sort of started me off wanting to be in entertainment.
Sure.
But yeah, I can do because also the live music and then live comedy, the sense of timing is very
Hmm.
important.
Oh yeah.
And bad timing, it doesn't work. Great timing, it's perfect. And I think so. Yeah, so those are sort of my inspirations as a child.
That's fantastic. I love where
To
that led.
well, you don't get to ask me.
So
You don't get to ask many questions talking to me because I like finding out the actual answer.
it's all good. It's all good. How did that go from, making music, listening to comedy to advertising? Because there's a bit of a leap there. I mean, maybe not such a big leap, but
I think when you remember that we're in Australia and we're a small
mhm.
market and you don't get the luxury of being able to specialize the way that perhaps you do in America or to a certain extent Canada,
Okay.
that market size means that being a jack of all trades is a common is a common element of and also an ability to change and adapt.
Mm.
Those are common elements of people who kind of make it in some way in entertainment. And so I started in community radio and I had to make lots of radio ads for the community radio station. I got into comedy when I was like 19 and did that for a few years while doing radio and community TV. And then someone asked me to make an ad for them, but funny, because we made a sketch comedy show. And so then I was making a couple of funny ads and I was doing stand up and I was just kind of advertising opportunities started to present themselves. But also, I had a business degree. And so falling into the producer line sort of became my thing, because I could communicate with all the creative people, but I didn't, always necessarily have the stomach for being a full-time writer or a full-time comedian or a full-time whatever those careers could have
You
been.
got to do it all. Why would you choose?
Yeah, well, yeah. So I ended up making lots of video ads and TV,
Hmm.
TV commercials. Still when it was film, so I got to work on film and audio tape just for a little bit, but still a bit of film. And so I got to, really see the craft being made.
Yeah.
And so I
So
made,
there's a big difference. There must be a big difference between analog and digital.
yeah.
Or is there?
Well, I mean, it's just a capture method. It was digital. Most of the editing
Well, yeah.
methods was the tape to tape stuff was moving very quickly to sort of the early version of how we do it now.
Does it
Um,
change how you work with the medium, though? Is what I was
oh, right, right,
wondering.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure, totally. If you can't roll tape forever like you can now, we do it
Hmm.
from like 6 cameras at the same time, or
Sure.
um, yeah. If the tape is expensive to deal with and a hassle, then you just don't roll as much. So you rehearse more, you're more prepared, and then you have less go takes. So editing becomes a lot easier in analog. I think where the business my business Ampel works is that we still try and play as much of an analog game as we can,
Hmm.
and do as much in person as possible, because it's a creative pursuit and everyone feeds off each other's energy and what sounds good and what feels right. Whereas when you're sending out 50 things for feedback and approvals and rounds and rounds and rounds of changes, you just never get a result. So that I much prefer the analog way of doing things. But also you get a richness. There's a if we're not talking for a second here and there's a breath, there's no sound, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you are in a tactile medium, the way film and tape is, there's always a little something.
Yeah, sure enough.
So that's, I think, now with all the, anyway, back to the question of how do I get into advertising? Survival, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so I ended up getting a full-time job at, I worked kind of freelance everywhere. Mm-hmm. Kind of pick an industry, pick a entertainment, pick a media. Like I've done sort of almost everything. Certainly from a production perspective. And when I went to MediaCom as head of production, I'd never worked in an agency before, but it was a very small creative department with an amazing boss, Gemma Hunter, a creative director called Shelby Craig, and a team, and Tess Wood, and who was our account director, sort of head of, I don't know, she ran the joint, and another guy called Taylor Thornton, who was a junior creative, and we had this unbelievable team that just fused perfectly together. And we were able to do a whole bunch of things that were not necessarily advertising, but they were they're called brand funded content, which is a terrible phrase. Because, well, no, but like brand funded, saying it's a shitty form of whatever it is we're making because a brand paid for it. Whereas,
well, they call them branded podcasts, right? And yet, I
sure.
mean, I don't know. I guess they kind of have that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so my approach to advertising is completely different as a result of that time with that team, because we got to make huge TV shows and great ads and great educational videos, and we put a photo on an ATM for a client. We put videos into branches of a bank. Same client, actually. We sold DVDs and CDs. We did lots of cool stuff. And so
that brand moniker never really, you didn't want to get lost in that.
I was covered in it. It stuck to me, I hate it. I hate the way it stuck to me. However, everyone needs a label, I guess, right? Because people need to understand why they should work with you. And so for a long time, that was my label was, connected to brand funded entertainment.
But you said that brand had this connotation of like bad content, right? So the idea being that hopefully you were helping to change that
that's right.
assumption.
That's right. And so I always wanted to get back to community radio. I always wanted to get back on air. And when podcasting sort of came around, I was like, hello. I was the first person globally to, for no reason other than I wanted to license the theme music from Serial. Was very distinctive. It had a really unique sound in the podcasting world. And I love music that is different. And so I went and licensed that track. The composer was very surprised that someone to license it. I just wanted to license it for a who we are as a team. So like our team intro video. Not one person ever recognized it as the music from Serial, which pissed me off. So I would mention it every single time. And then they'd be like, oh yeah. So that was funny. But yeah, so from there I became a podcast evangelist, and I got back into making some podcasts, I was able to make some podcasts. They started to move very well. COVID hit. I started to really focus on the ads in the podcasting. Then I started getting the opportunity to do radio ads again. And it was just like it it was just like riding a very comfortable old bike when I sat down the first time to cut it. All the skills were there from 20 years prior, and I was like, yeah, we're just going to do everything we want to do, and let's forget about the video because the audio is much more interesting. And then sonic branding has really been a focus of mine, as well as making radio ads and podcast ads that are for the audience, or the audioance, as I like to say.
Okay.
I haven't figured out how to say it as well as it reads. It doesn't even read that well.
That was pretty good.
Audioance, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to, I've done a lot of research in the behavioral applications for music and for sound, for brands and for podcasters and just anyone. And
I'd love to hear more about that, actually. If you've discovered anything that you feel you should share, I would love to hear what you've decided, what you've come up with.
Well, I think I'm not sure when this will be released, but October 25 today is or 24 is the 20th anniversary of the McDonald's I'm Lovin' It.
Yes.
Ba-da-da-da-da. Or the 50 variants of that track over the last 20 years.
Of course. Yeah.
I think it's the perfect example of an audio logo, right? It's only the motif really, but they change the music all the time for whatever the visual creative is, and then at the end it ends with one iteration or another of ba-da-da-da-da, and it's a very flexible way to end it. Now, it doesn't say McDonald's ever, because when you do that much advertising in visual form, eventually someone's going to see it and they're going to hear it, and so they don't need to say McDonald's in their opinion.
Well, it's kind of evolved over so many years too, hasn't it? I mean, it started as a full song, and then they were only doing the chorus, and then they were doing just that little bit, and then, someone else was doing it. And then, there's been so many developments over time. And as you say, it's been used for so long and so often that people just automatically went with I don't know what you'd call it, like the devolving of the song into a logo.
Well, I think they did it the way they did it the way they did it was over time. They committed to it, and so they did it slowly because clearly they didn't want to use McDonald's in the motif. So that's why I call it an audio logo, by the way, not a sonic logo. A sonic logo would include the word of the company name, right? So that, EA Sports, it's in the game. That's a sonic logo to me. Doesn't need a visual, right? Whereas McDonald's, the ba-da-da-da-da, as great as it is, and it is sonic in every way, it fits with a visual, so it's therefore an audio logo to me. So that's how I kind of.
So that's your difference.
That's my difference.
So a sonic logo doesn't have a visual component, and an audio logo does.
That's right.
Is that the idea?
That's the idea. Audio, visual, sonic, right? So that's the difference.
Okay.
And getting back to the behavioral side of the McDonald's logo, so it can be sung, it can be hummed, it's always recognizable, it's got the notes, ba da ba 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 da 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 da. So you don't even need to say it correctly, you know exactly what it is, right? But when you see those 5 phrases at the McDonald's window just before you're about to pick up your burger in the drive-thru, and you see that sign, that car becomes a band, because they go, what is that? Ba-da-da-da-da. And then, so obviously McDonald's is in the business of selling Happy Meals and serving customers. I think, I don't know how many billions they've served, but I wonder how many trillions of tunes have been delivered in that car in that way and by the audioance
Yeah, it's a
getting
shared experience. That's, you know, that's good. That's a good experience is good advertising, I guess. I mean, that's memorable.
yeah, and I'm not getting get into the to the actual product even, but like just even consideration and top of mind. It does a lot psychologically.
Sure.
But being consistent for so long means that they'll still be, whether they continue using it or not, it'd be unfortunate if they stopped, but because there's so many different new ways it can be done, but they'll be reaping the rewards from this 20 years for many, many years, because what they've done is they've put it into 20 years worth of young heads, and you stick a tune into a young head and you will be in that playlist in their head forever.
Yeah. So
And
that's part of the psychology right there.
that's right. And, and music comes through an eardrum, which is a very small, simple device in your brain. It goes straight into your head without complication, really, compared to visual. And it activates both sides of the brain, which is why you can remember lyrics to a song that you heard in kindergarten and you haven't heard since, right? Or where you hear something You're like, I know this song. What is that song? Or you hear one note and you go, that's Benny and the Jets.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you hear a drum note and you can say, no. Or, no, this is Werewolves of London, not Sweet Home Alabama. And, you can, even though it's exactly the same chord progression, you can tell which song it is.
Yeah.
And so I think.
All songs I love, by the way. I grew up with them too. So.
Yeah. See, Warren Zevon hated that song because he made it up in 15 minutes.
That's what happens, right? I've talked with people who have YouTube channels or do social media things trying to get something to go viral, and the thing they took 3 hours to put together does nothing, and the thing they took 5 minutes suddenly explodes, right? So there's no rhyme or reason, really. I think it's just people find something fun, or they find it authentic, or they connect with it in some way. And it's hard to know what will hit.
Yeah. And so I think, again, looking at McDonald's, that Sonic brand actually bears no relationship with the brand, with the product, right? Other than being happy and joyful.
Interesting.
Right? So it's happy and joyful, and McDonald's makes you happy and joyful, right? And so it's found its connection over time as opposed to being created, specifically for them. And I think it's a rare example. It's kind of like when someone says to me, I want to make a podcast like Joe Rogan. And I'm like, well, that just didn't happen. There's a lot of, there's work there. And I think when someone says to me, like the McDonald's jingle, I'm like, yeah, I can put 5 notes together for you, but how do we do that? And so we've created a Sonic brand format to work with clients so that we can create the backstory, so we can make sure it ties into the values and all that straight away, because we are constructing it. And so
I was going to ask you about that. So you have a particular process that you go through. Is there, can you talk about how you do that in as much specifics as you can? Or, I mean, I know you can't give me entire details, but the idea of.
So basically, we need to understand a lot about the brand, right? Who the brand is, what the brand stands for, everything about it, the heritage for the older ones or the ambition for the newer ones. We need to understand their audience, right? A lot of people don't exactly know their audience. Some know them absolutely fantastically. Right. Some it's a bit in the middle. Our job is not to create the audience necessarily. Our job is just to collate all of the stuff people have already done for their visual style guide or their tone of voice. And then we kind of apply the Sonic style guide approach to it. So understanding the messaging that they need to say, basically it's an audio style guide, right? But it's in sound. Sorry, it's a sonic approach, right? So it doesn't need that visual, but it works with the visual. And we need to understand what their advertising channels are. And then, terms and conditions, if they're healthcare or finance, and, what's the boring bits as well? What do they grapple with?
So do they tell you this, or do you find out yourself somehow, or
both?
How does that happen?
Both.
Okay.
I think there are certain things. There's 80% of every industry that's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 80% of every client that we have that's exactly the same. And then every industry and every client has a 20% uniqueness to them.
That's where the magic is, right?
That's where the magic is.
Yeah.
And so accepting reality on that, for me, took a long time, because I never wanted to have like a production process or a creative process. I always thought, I was always of the opinion that when you get inspired, off you go. But now I have we have so many clients, so many people, etc. We have to create that on demand. So we quickly listen to the industry. We quickly listen to the client. Usually the thing I love about sound is you've actually figured out answers to the questions within a very short period of time. You don't have to listen for very long, right? If you hear a message twice, you go, oh, that must be their message. Turned up in 2 ads, it becomes to me, it's obvious pretty quickly. And then we listen for the subtle things, the little sound effects, the devices, the mnemonics, the motifs, what they've got in play. I would go with 80 to 90%. This is not statistical, but 80, 90% of my clients have tried something before and it's not working, or they've never tried it before and they have nothing.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.